What if history has hidden a story so profound that it could change everything we think we know? What if Jesus' childhood held secrets lost to time? Secrets that were never written in the Bible. Today we uncover the untold story of Jesus as a boy. A story that may shock you, inspire you, and leave you wondering why it was never told before. The night was silent, but the world was changing. The child Jesus was born under a sky filled with stars. His parents, Mary and Joseph, whispered prayers over him, never knowing the path he would one day walk. But what was his life like before the miracles, before the teachings, before the cross? As a toddler, Jesus was curious, his eyes wide with wonder at the world around him. His small hands reached out to touch the fabric of his mother's robe, his laughter echoing through their humble home. But even then, strange things happened. The sick who came near him seemed to feel relief. The flowers in the garden bloomed brighter when he passed. "Mary," Joseph once said, watching the boy, "there is something about him, something beyond us." Mary simply smiled, holding her son close. He is a gift, a light in the darkness. But peace would not last. The jealous King Herod sought to destroy him, and the family fled to Egypt. In the golden lands of the pharaohs, young Jesus grew in wisdom. He watched the great temples rise, listened to the stories of old scribes, and met children who spoke of gods he did not know. But within him, there was a truth that no temple could contain. One day, as he walked by the Nile, a stranger approached him. The man, draped in robes of deep blue, knelt before him and whispered, "The world does not know who you are, but they will." Jesus, no older than 5, simply looked up and smiled. "I am." The streets of Egypt were alive with the chatter of merchants and the scent of spices carried on the warm desert breeze. Young Jesus, now a boy of 6, walked alongside Mary as they passed the great statues of the gods of old. "Mother," Jesus asked, his small hand gripping hers, "why do they worship stone?" Mary looked down at him, her heart filled with wonder at the depth of his thoughts. "They do not know the one true God as we do," she said softly. Jesus turned his gaze to a priest burning incense before a golden idol. His eyes, wise beyond his years, reflected the flickering flames. Then something strange happened. The incense burned brighter, the air grew still, and for a moment, a hush fell over the marketplace. The priest turned, eyes wide with something between fear and awe, staring at the young boy before him. But before he could speak, the wind resumed, the sounds of the city returning as if nothing had happened. As the years passed, Jesus' presence became more mysterious. When he touched the injured bird that had fallen from its nest, its wings straightened and it flew away. When he placed his hand on a fevered child, the sickness vanished. But he was still just a boy, learning, growing, and discovering the world. One evening, as he sat beside his mother, he asked, "Why do people suffer, Mother?" Mary sighed, brushing his curls from his forehead. "It is the way of the world, my son." Jesus looked out at the setting sun. "But I can feel the pain even when I close my eyes." His mother said nothing, for in her heart she knew her son was unlike any other. Years passed, and the family returned to their homeland. The boy who had left Egypt now walked the streets of Nazareth with a quiet strength. He studied in the temple, asking questions that stunned even the elders. One day, as the young Jesus sat in the shade of an olive tree, a group of boys ran past him laughing. One of them, a boy named Eli, tripped and fell, scraping his knee. Jesus stood and walked over, kneeling beside him. "Does it hurt?" Eli winced. "Yes." Jesus placed his small hand over the wound. The air around them seemed to hum, and when Jesus pulled his hand away, the scrape was gone. Eli gasped, How did you do that?" Jesus only smiled. "You were already healing. I just helped." From that day, whispers spread among the children. Jesus of Nazareth was not like the others. The years passed, and Jesus continued to grow, not just in strength, but in wisdom. The people of Nazareth began to notice the quiet power he carried. One afternoon, as Jesus helped Joseph in the carpentry shop, an old man entered, leaning on a cane. His hands trembled, his face lined with years of hardship. "Joseph," the old man rasped, "I fear this may be my last summer. My hands no longer work, and my family will have nothing." Joseph glanced at Jesus, who watched the man with gentle eyes. Without a word, Jesus stepped forward, taking the man's hands in his own. The room grew still. The old man gasped, his fingers stretching, the pain melting away. He looked up at the boy, eyes brimming with tears. What have you done?" he whispered. Jesus simply smiled. "You can work again." The man flexed his hands, the strength returning to his fingers. He fell to his knees. "Blessed be this boy." Joseph placed a firm hand on Jesus' shoulder. "Son," he murmured, "you must be careful. The world does not always welcome miracles." But Jesus only looked out the window at the endless sky. At the age of 12, Jesus and his family traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. The streets were filled with travelers from all over the land, the temple towering above them in golden splendor. But in the excitement of the journey home, Mary and Joseph realized something: Jesus was missing. They searched frantically, their hearts pounding as they retraced their steps. Finally, they found him inside the temple, seated among the teachers, deep in discussion. An elder leaned forward. "Child, how do you know such things?" Jesus met his gaze. "I know because I remember." The elder frowned. "Remember what?" Jesus smiled softly. "The beginning." Mary rushed forward, grasping his arm. "My son, why have you done this? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." Jesus looked at her, his expression serene. "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know I must be in my Father's house?" Joseph and Mary exchanged a glance, their hearts filled with awe and fear. As Jesus grew, he spent more and more time in solitude. He walked the hills, watching the birds soar above as if longing for something unseen. One evening, he stood at the edge of the river, watching his reflection in the rippling water. The voice came like a whisper in the wind. "The time is coming." Jesus closed his eyes. He already knew. The years passed, and Jesus became a young man. Though he worked alongside Joseph, shaping wood and building homes, his heart longed for something beyond the simple life of Nazareth. One evening, as he walked alone into the hills, a storm gathered in the distance. The wind howled through the trees and the sky darkened. A voice, neither near nor far, whispered through the air, "You know who you are." Jesus did not turn. He simply closed his eyes. A flicker of something, an ancient memory, surged within him. The weight of eternity pressed against his chest. He gripped the bark of a tree, steadying himself. Then, as suddenly as it came, the presence was gone. The storm passed, and the night fell silent once more. One day, as Jesus worked in the shop, a desperate cry echoed through the village. A woman ran through the streets, cradling a child in her arms. "Help, someone, help my son!" The villagers gathered, whispering as the woman fell to her knees before Joseph's shop. The child in her arms was limp, his face pale. Jesus stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" "He stopped breathing," the mother sobbed. "Please, do something." The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads, others looked away, unwilling to witness another tragedy. Jesus placed a hand on the child's chest, his eyes closed, his breath steady. Then, a shudder. The child gasped. His chest rose, his small fingers twitching. Then, as if waking from a dream, he opened his eyes. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. The mother wept, clutching her son close. A man in the crowd whispered, "Who is this?" But Jesus simply stood and walked away. Time moved forward, and Jesus continued to live quietly. But deep within, he knew his life was not meant for silence. One morning, he stood at the edge of the village, watching the road that stretched beyond the hills. He exhaled, his decision made. Mary stood beside him, sensing his thoughts. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Jesus nodded. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "Then go, my son. The world is waiting." And so, with the rising sun at his back, Jesus of Nazareth took his first steps toward destiny. Jesus walked for days, the dusty road stretching endlessly before him. The sun burned high in the sky, but he did not waver. His feet carried him forward towards something unseen but deeply known. Then, as the land turned to wilderness, he stopped. For 40 days and 40 nights, he remained in the desert, fasting, praying, listening to the silence of creation. His body weakened, but his spirit strengthened. Then, on the final day, a shadow moved among the rocks. A voice, smooth as silk, cut through the stillness. "You are hungry," the voice whispered. "Turn these stones into bread." Jesus, though weary, stood firm. His eyes, filled with quiet strength, met the darkness. Man shall not live by bread alone. The air grew colder. The voice laughed. Look at the kingdoms of the world, it said. Bow to me, and they will be yours. Jesus' jaw tightened. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve. The presence shifted, circling like a vulture. If you are the Son of God, it taunted, throw yourself down from this height. Let the angels catch you. Jesus exhaled slowly. You shall not test the Lord your God. Silence. Then, like a wind scattering dry leaves, the shadow vanished. And in its place, a golden light descended from the heavens. A voice, not of earth, whispered, "It is time." Jesus, now stronger than before, turned and walked toward the Jordan River. The river shimmered under the midday sun. Crowds had gathered, drawn by the voice of a prophet, the wild man known as John the Baptist. "Repent," John called, his voice like thunder. "The kingdom of heaven is at hand." The people murmured, their eyes wide as John spoke of the one who was coming. Then a man stepped forward. John froze, his breath catching in his throat. He knew. Jesus waded into the water, standing before John with a gaze that saw beyond time. "I have need to be baptized by you," John whispered. "And yet you come to me," Jesus nodded. "Let it be so now." John, his hands trembling, lowered Jesus into the river. As Jesus rose from the water, the heavens split open. A light, brighter than the sun, shone down, and a voice, deep and eternal, echoed across the land. "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." The people fell to their knees. The air was thick with wonder. Jesus looked up, the water dripping from his hair. He had heard the voice before, in the stillness of his soul. But now, the world had heard it too. He stepped out of the river. His time had come. Jesus traveled across villages, his presence stirring whispers. At a wedding in Cana, when the wine ran out, Mary turned to him. "They have no wine," she said. Jesus met her gaze, understanding. Moments later, the jars were filled with the finest wine. The guests marveled, unaware they had just witnessed the first miracle. From there, the miracles grew. He healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and spoke of a kingdom not of this world. Crowds followed him, drawn by something beyond understanding. By one morning, by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus called to fishermen, "Follow me." Without hesitation, they left their nets. A tax collector abandoned his table. A zealot laid down his weapons. They did not know where he would lead them, only that they had to follow. On a hillside, Jesus spoke to thousands. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." His words were unlike any before. Gentle yet unshakable, simple yet eternal. But not all rejoiced. The Pharisees whispered in dark corners, "Who is this man who speaks with authority?" As Jesus' following grew, so did the danger. Yet he did not stop. On evening, as he sat with his disciples, Jesus looked toward Jerusalem. The road before him was clear. His childhood was over, his purpose awaited, and so he walked forward, toward the cross, toward eternity, toward a destiny that would change the world forever. But what of the missing years? What of the miracles and mysteries left untold? History offers only glimpses, but the story of Jesus' early life leaves us with one question: what else remains hidden? Could there be more to his journey than we have ever known? If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of history's greatest figures. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you think happened during the lost years of Jesus' life? The mystery continues.